Hello guys, welcome back to our anime moments. Guys, please like the video and subscribe to my channel. Today is explanation of upcoming episode of Tales of Herding Gods based on novel. So let's start. Roland's golden palace was wiped out and Grand Shaman was also slain by Imperial Preceptor. Pan Gong So pondered about the painful experience and knew that he could no longer stay in the prairie. Eternal Peace Imperial Preceptor would definitely order his subordinates to search everywhere for his trail, so he decided to hide in the flaming desert. He was a reincarnated person, so his cultivation advanced at a crazy speed. He had an advantage that no other divine arts practitioner could rival, and by hiding in the oasis, he could capture the people of West Earth at night and bring them over for cultivation. Like that, in just half a year, he broke through into 7 Stars realm. He planned to recover the cultivation of his previous lives and fight his way back to eternal peace to take revenge. When that time came, who would be able to block his bow? Yet meeting Qin Mu made him somewhat flustered. He had raised his cultivation to 7 Stars realm and should have overwhelmed him, but the other's abilities seemed to have advanced by leaps and bounds as well. He actually didn't manage to gain any advantage. Pan Gong So, you have already fallen behind times. Qin Mu suddenly rushed out of the oasis into the flaming desert and his body moved horizontally as he crossed a mile. It looked like he was controlling the wind. The muscles on his body moved like flood dragons coiling and his corporeal body was incomparably powerful. You've been hiding here so you might not know. After your Roland's golden palace was wiped out, the paths, skills, and divine arts have advanced rapidly. We can already cultivate the primordial spirit on the 6 directions realm, so aside from a divine treasure in 7 Stars realm, there's literally no difference. In terms of cultivation realm, you aren't any higher than me. Pan Gong So's body, which was like a golden Buddha, collided with Qin Mu. Dragon roars and Buddha voices rang out endlessly, and Pan Gong So's face instantly turned snow white. His arm cracked and broke as he flew backward. This isn't 9 Dragons Monarch technique, he shouted fiercely. 9 Dragon Monarch technique had extremely high attainments of the corporeal body and was the ultimate art of Emperor Yang Feng. Even though Pan Gong So had not received it, he had exchanged blows with Qin Mu, who used 9 Dragons Monarch technique. Even though it had been powerful then, there was still quite a number of divine techniques that could rival it, so Pan Gong So wasn't the slightest bit afraid of it. However, he suffered a huge loss at that 9 Dragons Monarch technique right then. The moves Qin Mu had executed were extremely overbearing. The strength of his corporeal body was incomparably powerful, as though he was a human-shaped true dragon. When its strength burst forth, his muscles, tendons, and bones were like brute dragons exerting their strength all at once. Facing such brute strength, Pan Gong So's golden Buddha body crumbled and his arm broke. A bone shard stuck out of his elbow. Sword explosion. Qin Mu pressed his palm downwards. Swoosh, swoosh, swoosh. Countless flying swords fell from midair like rain, and sword lights fell forward like a tidal wave raised by an explosion, drowning out Pan Gong So. He endured the sharp pain, and his body sank downwards, escaping into the desert before the sword light could touch him. 8,000 swords landed, and the desert nearly boiled. Between the particles of sand, fine sword lights were shuttling to and fro. Qin Mu landed on the ground and his clothes fluttered. He raised a huge wind to forcefully suppress the flames of the desert. The tip of his foot tapped on the ground, then he raised again. Everywhere he passed, the flames would automatically split to 2 sides. Several miles away, the desert was boiling. Countless sword lights rushed into the sky, and Qin Mu let out a roar while his vital chi went berserk, rushing forward while staying close to the red-colored sand and rocks. Instantly, there were trails of red sand dragons in the desert. Dozens of them were shuttling to and fro in the red sand, popping in and out. In no time, they came to where the sword light was overflowing into the sky. The power of his divine art suddenly exploded, resulting in a powerful dragon roar which reverberated through the air and sand being blasted into the air. In the sandstorm, flying swords were flashing while Pan Gong So's figure could be faintly discerned as well. He stood on a huge cauldron which was trembling. Its sound waves materialized and flicked the flying swords away. The huge cauldron suddenly escaped into the ground and left through the sand. Qin Mu quickly gave chase and shouted, "Ching Ching, go fetch some water and hurry over with Fatty Dragon." Bewildered, Xiong Chia said to the dragon Qilin, "Big brother is muddle-headed. He called me Ching Ching." The dragon Qilin shook his head. "You don't know the ability of that Pangong so. If he knows your name, he can kill you by paying his respects to you from 1,000 miles away, so Cult Master didn't call out your real name. It should be because Cult Master doesn't have absolute confidence in killing him, so he asked us to fetch some water and follow after him. Cult Master is an abandoned person, so he can't stay long in the flaming desert. There's also no water vapor in the flaming desert, so he can't use water attribute divine arts as well. Let's quickly fetch some water and hurry after him." Xiong Chia understood his words and was about to fetch the water from the lake when she cried out in astonishment. The dragon Qilin immediately went over and saw that there were white bones all over the lake's bottom. It was hard to count how many corpses had been thrown inside it. Pangong So relied on the spirit and soul of other people to cultivate. For that, he had killed countless experts of West Earth and thrown their corpses in the lake. "Do we still fetch water?" Xiong Chia's face was pale white. The dragon Qilin bit his tongue and spat a small mouthful of blood into the lake. Its surface instantly churned. Countless soul bugs splashed around the lake, fighting over the blood. The dragon Qilin immediately bit onto Xiong Chia's collar to lift her up and retreated, preventing any water from touching either of them both. "This lake has been poisoned and can't be drunk." The dragon Qilin placed the little girl down a bit farther away and said, "Climb to the tip of my tail, sit down properly, and lean back." He lowered his tail, and Xiong Chia immediately climbed on. She sat down properly, not forgetting to lean back. The dragon Qilin raised his tail and Xiong Chia slid down from the tip to his back. The little girl squealed in delight. "One more time. We can't play anymore. Grab tight onto the manet around my neck. I'm going to chase after Cult Master," the dragon Qilin instructed. Xiong Chia climbed over to his long manet and her tiny hands grabbed tightly onto two tufts. Suddenly, a dragon scale rose on the side and covered her. The dragon Qilin did it since he was afraid it would be easy for her to slip off if he ran too fast. Before, there was Qin Mu protecting Xiong Chia, so the dragon Qilin didn't need to worry, but when Qin Mu wasn't around, he had to care for Xiong Chia himself. The dragon Qilin also used magic power to form a barrier around Xiong Chia and gave her a warning to be careful before taking the first step to rush after Qin Mu. His speed gradually grew faster as he didn't dare to suddenly increase his speed. He ran faster and faster, soon surpassing the speed of sound. The flaming dunes passed by them like flickering lights and shadows. "Fatty Dragon, your speed is even faster than last time." Xiong Chia cried out. "Why didn't you run so fast in front of Big Brother? What does a little girl like you know? If you want a horse to run faster, you need to feed the horse well." The dragon Qilin was pleased with himself and smiled. "I purposely run slower so Cult Master will give me better spirit pills in hopes of me getting faster from good food. If I slowly increase my speed, he will know it's the effect of the better spirit pills. In that way he will work harder to improve the spirit pills. On top of that, he will still take care of how the pills feel in my mouth. If I suddenly raise my speed drastically, he won't improve the spirit pills and will just feed me the substandard product of fire element divine vitality pills. Don't tell Cult Master that though, or he will become lazy." Xiong Chia didn't understand what he was saying, but she still nodded repeatedly. The dragon Qilin ran for a long while, but he still didn't catch up to Qin Mu. On the way, he was aghast when he saw the sight of the exploded dunes. It was evident that Qin Mu and Pangong So had clashed nearby. Not long later, the dragon Qilin saw a dune in the distance transforming into a red sand giant which punched the ground ruthlessly. "That's the technique of my West Earth's true heaven palace." Xiong Chia cried out in astonishment. "Is that Big Brother?" The dragon Qilin shook his head, a little worried. "Cult Master doesn't have magic power that is that dense. Let's take a detour." He took a roundabout way and couldn't help being stunned when he saw the sand giant. There was a ruin in the desert. More than half of the earth yellow palaces had collapsed and only some crumbling fences and dilapidated walls were left. Flames were burning a bit more furiously over there than in other places. The space that the ruins occupied was very vast, the size of several thousand fields. Flames blazed around the sand giant, and its body was scarlet from them. The giant had no legs, but it could still travel extremely fast along the great streets and small alleys of the ruin. Below the body of the sand giant was violent sand that kept spinning upwards, thus even though it had no legs, its speed was still very fast. At that moment, the sand giant was chasing after Qin Mu and Pan Gong Tso. The two of them were being attacked often, and loud thumps rang out continuously. Every strike from the sand dune giant was incomparably heavy, and when they landed on the desert, sandstone would shoot out like swords. Yet the sand giant didn't damage the ruin at all. When it encountered broken fences and dilapidated walls, it would flood over. After it flowed past, the ruin would be left perfectly fine. The divine arts of West Earth was different from those of eternal peace, and the path they took was that of all things having soul. Even sandstone could be changed into a giant to fight, and one strike from a sand giant could split mountains. Its power was unblockable. If Qin Mu and Pan Gong Tso got struck, just the terrifying energy alone would be enough to heavily injure the two of them. Even so, they were still trying to kill each other while doing their best to avoid the attacks of the sand giant. Pan Gong Tso's broken arm impaired his movements. Qin Mu could control 8,000 swords, but no matter how intricate his sword skill was, it was still hard for him to injure the sand giant. Even if he sliced one of its arms into pieces, this giant would return back to normal in a few moments, retaining no injury. Its body technique was extraordinary, and the attacks of the sand giant were incomparably overbearing. However, since it only used its fists to attack and not spells or divine arts, it wasn't much of a threat to them. However, what was weird was that the sand giant seemed to only be attacking Qin Mu. It paid no attention to Pan Gong Tso. Spell of True Heaven Palace. The dragon Qilin looked around and asked, "Where is the spellcaster hiding?" "That's a guardian of the desert. It's not a divine art." Xiong Chia climbed onto his head while pulling on his manner. She took a look at the situation and said, "My mom said that there are many ancient ruins in the desert, and they are places where the gods who guarded the desert lived. When they had to go, they left behind some guardians to look after the desert. Any person from great ruins will be attacked by the guardians." Suddenly, red sand churned in the ruin and another sand giant stood up, rushing quickly at the youth. Qin Mu stretched his hands out and numerous scarlet red sand dragons whizzed forward, rushing at the sand giants. While chasing after Pan Gong Tso, his vital qi had been circulating more and more furiously, and the power of his divine art becoming stronger and stronger. At that moment, his battle power was at its strongest. The dozens of scarlet sand dragons tore apart the sand giants. Eh? Qin Mu was astonished, for he felt the magic power in his divine art being absorbed. When the sand dragons passed through the bodies of the sand giants, the magic power inside them completely vanished. Pan Gong Tso saw a good moment and rushed over with the huge cauldron on his head. The two sand giants behind him who had absorbed the magic power the divine art as well as the dozens of sand dragons grew drastically and attacked Qin Mu as well. Qin Mu formed fists and straightened his thumb, using a punch to fight against Pan Gong Tso's punch. Pan Gong Tso immediately felt that his attack had no power, but that there was a concaving power in the fist that was pulling him in. The straightened thumb made Pan Gong Tso shudder. The power in that punch of his lies in that thumb. He struggled to break free, having just realized that Qin Mu's move was not a fist skill at all. Instead, it was a sword skill in which his thumb was the sword. If Pan Gong Tso didn't break free and the thumb pressed down on him, the sword power would definitely slice him in half. How did this fellow's battle technique improve so fast and become so terrifying? It hasn't even been a year since the last time we fought, so how did his abilities improve so fast? Pan Gong Tso used all his strength to break free from Qin Mu's fist. The moment he did so, the sword light in Qin Mu's thumb increased exponentially. His vital qi transformed into a thread which was like fine swords coiling together. The sword light sliced down when Qin Mu pressed his thumb down. Pan Gong Tso suddenly changed into a black shadow which fell and stuck to the sandy ground. He then quickly left into the distance. Qin Mu raised his hand and pressed down, causing a huge handprint to appear on the ground. Pan Gong So let out a sigh of relief. This guy missed. Yet the next moment, the sword lights that were hiding in the sky and covering the earth hummed and shot down altogether. The area they covered was extremely vast and made it impossible for him to avoid them. Suddenly, a third sand giant stood up from beneath Qin Mu's feet, and the sword rain falling from midair grew disordered. Pan Gong So broke out from his shadow and transformed into a human to leap out from the desert. He flashed along the way to avoid the sword lights, escaping out of the ruin. He turned back to take a look, only to see Qin Mu being drowned out by the three sand giants. His life and death could not be determined. When this guy gets severely injured, it would be the best time for me to kill him. Just as Pan Gong So thought that, he saw the dragon Qin sprinting over and sneered. Even an animal like you dares to make a move on me. He then bowed and shouted sternly, "Fatty dragon, update bye." A huge sacrificial altar appeared behind him and the devil god on the sacrificial also bowed. The dragon Qin ignored him, and Pan Gong So grew slightly flustered. He bowed once more in a hurry. Dragon Qin. The dragon Qin was already near him, flames spreading out from his mouth. Pan Gong So vomited blood. His injuries were not light, and the divine art which paid respect to the soul was extremely exhausting to his vitality. Paying his respects twice drained a lot of his vitality. Ching ching. Pan Gong So gritted his teeth and paid his respects once more. Xiong Chia grabbed the mane of the dragon Qin and climbed onto the head of the fat behemoth to look curiously at the youth before them. Pan Gong So spat out a mouthful of blood as a beam of fire from the dragon Qilin's mouth emanated with blazing flames, sweeping at him across a dozen miles. Everywhere the beam passed, the dunes were razed to the ground. Pan Gong So hurriedly hid in the great cauldron and listened as the loud banging sounds went into the distance. The cauldron was then swept into the air and tumbled dozens of miles away. The dragon Qin sprinted over where the cauldron had landed, but only saw a sand pit with bloodstains. It was obvious that Pan Gong So had escaped into the ground. My abilities actually couldn't stop him. Those who can live for 10,000 years are indeed all remarkable. His ability to escape is even superior to that of Cult Master, the dragon Qin exclaimed in admiration. A loud explosion suddenly came from the ruin, and the dragon Qin turned back to look. Over there, he saw a fourth sand giant rising from the ground. It was 100 yards tall and comparable to Great Thunderclap Monastery's 10,000 Buddhas pagoda. It moved incomparably fast and chased relentlessly after Qin Mu. I can't let Cult Master be harmed. The dragon Qin immediately sprinted over, and he saw Qin Mu's body suddenly vanish. The next moment, he appeared in front of him and floated in midair. His whole body was covered in strange flames and teleportation runes circulating rapidly. Qin Mu hurriedly extinguished the flames on his body, his face already black from the burns. Luckily, his clothes were tailored by Yu Jiaoqing and other strong practitioners of Heavenly Feather race, so they weren't destroyed in the flames. Various sounds rang out behind him, and Qin Mu turned back to take a look. The sand giants actually flew out of the ruin and rushed over aggressively. Fatty dragon, fall back. Qin Mu waved his hand and stopped the dragon Qin who was rushing over. The sand giants were extremely fast and soon rushed in front of Qin Mu. They then swayed and separated into two groups, launching a pincer attack on him from the right and left. Just as they were about to pounce on him, the teleportation runes around Qin Mu's body lighted up and his body vanished once more. The sand dune giants collided and sand filled the air. Soon though, they took shape once more and hurried back toward the ruin in a frantic rush. Before they could return, however, they suddenly crumbled and transformed back into dunes that piled one onto another. The dragon Qin hurriedly ran over to where Qin Mu was floating in midair. Below him was a palace that was more than half collapsed. Inside it was a shrine with a wooden god statue that was covered in strange markings. Its head was on the floor. Qin Mu raised his hand, and carefree sword flew into it. He looked at the head of the wooden god statue with a grim face. When he had lured the sand giants out just then, he had returned back to the ruin and surveyed it with Cinnabar Heaven's eyes. He discovered then that there were strange markings flowing continuously on the wooden god statue, so he had sliced off its head in one strike. Once he did that, the markings which were originally glowing slowly dimmed. A terrifying brainwave had rushed out from the god statue toward Qin Mu. However, it was blocked by the jade pendant hanging from his neck. How strange, Qin Mu turned his head back and asked, "Chia, they're gods in your West Earth's West Heaven Palace?" Xiong Chia shook her head and replied, "I've never heard about that before." Qin Mu gripped the jade pendant and said in a low voice, "There's a consciousness hidden in this god statue, and it even attacked me when I cut off its head. The owner of this god statue should still be alive." "Cult Master, Pan Gongso escaped," the dragon Qilin said. Qin Mu didn't mind it. He has been escaping for 10,000 years and has long perfected the art of it, so it won't be easy to get rid of him in one go. Didn't he also escape when Eternal Peace Imperial Preceptor surrounded Roland's Golden Palace? What makes my heart throb is that there might be a living god in West Earth's True Heaven Palace. He raised his head to look to the west. The wooden statue could actually gather sand to form giants. This showed that it was using the ultimate art of True Heaven Palace. It was called 10,000 Spirit Nature Technique and was suitable for women to cultivate. Even though Xiong Xiu had imparted it to Qin Mu, his gains weren't great. Imperial Preceptor went to True Heaven Palace, so he's probably going to be out of luck. Qin Mu pulled away his gaze and thought to himself, "I hope that God's ability isn't too great, for otherwise." He shook his head. What worries me even more is why did this god of True Heaven Palace leave behind this ruined palace? The sand giants are clearly for killing the abandoned people of Great Ruins. How exactly did True Heaven Palace look like originally? He jumped onto the dragon Qilin's back, who rushed toward the west. Soon, they covered over 10 miles. The ruin was silent, but after a moment, a rustling could be heard, and the markings on the two pieces of wood gradually lighted up. The head suddenly flew up and landed on the neck of the wooden statue. Its markings grew brighter and brighter. The sculpture actually slowly began to change, its wooden body turning into flesh and blood. What was even more terrifying was that the statue actually twisted its head to the back of its body. Its eyes slowly opened and looked in the direction of Qin Mu. The wooden statue opened its mouth and spoke in a hoarse voice. "A noble of the abandoned people, I?" Swoosh! A sword light broke through the air after having stayed close to the ground, piercing the head of the wooden statue that was changing into flesh and blood. The sword light then flashed, slicing the wooden god statue into countless pieces. Sometime later and 20 miles away, the sword light returned to Qin Mu's sheath. "God, I've also killed some of your kind before." Qin Mu folded his arms as he stood on the dragon Qilin's head. His body rose and lowered along with its movement. As the sun set in the west, the flaming desert was colored fiery red. Qin Mu rode on the dragon Qilin's head, having transformed his vital qi into vermilion bird vital qi to refine each and every one of his flying swords. He was deepening the rune markings on them. He lowered his head and saw that Xiong Chia had already fallen asleep in the dragon Qilin's ear. There was no wind there, and the dragon Qilin also used his ear to cover its inside to protect the little girl with utmost care. "Fatty dragon is really not bad," Qin Mu praised in his heart. "This fatty is actually quite meticulous. The taste of Scarlet Fire Spirit pills and Fire Element Divine Vitality pills is indeed not that good. I should improve it for him once we find a place to land." "Cult Master, there's an oasis ahead," the dragon Qilin suddenly said. Qin Mu looked ahead of them, and he indeed saw an oasis. "I wonder if there's water there. I can endure another day without water, but I'm afraid for Chia." The flaming desert was incomparably scorching, and there was no moisture in the air. Qin Mu couldn't get any water even when he changed to Black Tortoise Vital Qi. He had never had to worry about the problem of water supply before, but now with Xiong Chia by his side, he couldn't ignore it anymore. After a moment, the dragon Qilin reached the oasis, and they saw a couple snow-white goatskin tents built beside the lake. People wearing West Earth's clothing were raising fire to cook their meals. The dragon Qilin looked around cautiously and said, "I wonder if Pan Gongso escaped here. Cult Master, be careful. He's severely injured, so he couldn't have run far." Qin Mu jumped down and opened up the dragon Qilin's ear, from which he took out the sleeping Xiong Chia with a smile. Don't worry. Since I'm here, even if he's nearby, he won't dare to come out. If he decides to show up, it will just make it more convenient for me to get rid of him. The tribesmen of West Earth wore embroidered headbands. When they saw the newcomers, their faces changed drastically, but they didn't dare to make a sound. Qin Mu looked around and saw that there were a lot more men than women in the camp, and under the daily hardships, their faces were red from the sun. There were also some two-legged yellow gazelles in the oasis along with some commodities. The group was most likely traveling merchants. Even though the speed of the two-legged gazelles was fast and their ability to carry weight was also great, riding them was a very bumpy experience. Because of that, only merchants chose to use this kind of strange beast. Even it was bumpy riding the two-legged gazelles, they could deliver more goods. Qin Mu came to an elderly merchant and said, "Elder, my little sister is asleep. Could I borrow a tent?" The elderly merchant immediately nodded and said, "Help yourself." Qin Mu gave his thanks and sent the girl into a tent. The night in the desert was very cold, so it was lucky to get a goatskin tent to keep her warm. On top of that, there were some thick goat fur blankets inside. Qin Mu tucked in Xiong Chia, who was still in a daze. Her tiny hands grabbed onto the blanket and she smacked her lips twice. She had to be hungry, but she didn't wake up. Qin Mu walked out of the tent to see that the sun had already set. With the crackle of the bonfire beside him, he asked, "Elder, you guys are merchants from West Earth?" Everyone looked at Qin Mu's face and didn't dare to speak. Only the elderly merchant in charge dared to open his mouth. "We are from West Earth and are going to Great Ruins to do business." "Is Big Brother from Great Ruins?" Qin Mu was speechless at first, then broke into laughter. Even though he had grown quite tall, it wasn't even close to him being worthy to be called Big Brother. The fearfulness of the merchants had to be because of the flame markings on his face. From them, they could deduce that he came from Great Ruins. "I'm indeed from Great Ruins and I plan to go to West Earth." Qin Mu took out some fresh beef and fruit from his Daotai sack and gifted it to the other party with a smile. "Elder, thank you for letting my little sister have a place to rest. If Elder doesn't mind, you can just call me Little Qin." The elder couldn't reject and had to accept. "I don't dare to be called Elder. The position of us men in West Earth is slightly lower, only senior women are deserved to be called elders. Brother Qin, you are a person of Great Ruins, so it is not really good for you to go to West Earth. This flame desert stretches for tens of thousands of miles and there is blazing fire all along the way. Also, this fire poses numerous dangers to the people of Great Ruins, so it'd be best for you to return." Qin Mu shook his head. "I've made a promise to go to West Earth, so how can I break it? Women are the ones who call the shots in West Earth. Eternal Peace Empire also has women generals and officials. Back when Imperial Preceptor was pushing for equality between men and women, he met quite some opposition, so I would have never expected you guys to be even more open than Eternal Peace." The old merchant's face changed and he immediately said, "Shush! You can't say equality between men and women or you will be executed. How can men and women be equal? Women can give birth, men can't give birth, so of course, the men are a class lower." Qin Mu was stunned. The old merchant glanced around and said softly, "When you reach West Earth, don't say this kind of muddle-headed words. Of course, that's if you can survive your journey there." Qin Mu didn't know whether to laugh or cry. "When you reach West Earth, don't say you are from Great Ruins," the old merchant also added solemnly. "If you say you are from Great Ruins, you will soon be removed." Qin Mu frowned and asked, "Why so?" The old merchant wasn't willing to go into detail, and Qin Mu didn't force him. He continued to use his vital qi to refine his flying swords. When his cultivation got half exhausted, he would consume a few spirit pills. The flying swords became smaller and smaller from his refinement. "I'm still lacking compared to Grandpa Mute, able to refine swords into flowing water." Qin Mu grabbed a flying sword and rubbed it with his hands. It became a small sword pellet, but there were still some protrusions. He executed Carefree Sword and 8,000 swords collided, transforming into a sword pellet. Even though it was much smaller than before, it was still a square of 2 feet. Only when he refined the sword pellet to the size of a thumb could his refinement technique be considered improved. At that point, he could refine swords into flowing water. Qin Mu dispersed his sword pellet and grabbed Carefree sword. Nearly 8,000 flying swords came swooshing over one after another, fusing with the mother sword. Carefree sword became heavier and heavier, and when the last one fused into it, Qin Mu's hand trembled. The sword was way too heavy, but he could at least lift it. He tried to swing it, and even though it moved very slowly, crackling sounds from an explosion and humming from tremors came from the sky. It was like the descent of a huge mountain. The explosion noise came from the heaviness of the sword due to the compressed space. Qin Mu swung Carefree sword twice and his arms were already sore. He immediately dispersed the child's swords and no longer tormented himself with it. Those dragon language writings on Emperor's Disc and the True Dragon's Nest are really not bad. The 9 Dragons Monarch technique on them is improving my corporeal body at an extremely fast speed. I'd had no chance to lift this sword in the past. What a pity I still can't figure out many parts of the dragon language on them. In the last couple days, he'd been trying to fuse 9 Dragons Monarch technique with Overlord Body 3 Elixir technique, and his corporeal body was improving at a godly speed. In the past, he had only cultivated the body refinement techniques in great educational heavenly devil scriptures, so just the pure power his corporeal body alone was stronger than the divine arts of most divine arts practitioners. If he executed battle techniques like Thunderclap 8 Strikes and Pig Slaughter Knife, their power would be multiplied several times. The power of the corporeal body had an extraordinary impact on battle techniques. The merchants of West Earth went into their tents to sleep while Qin Mu sat beside the lake. The dragon Qilin had shrunk his size and asked Qin Mu for dragon-rearing scriptures. He lay down beside him and used the flames of the desert to read. Fatty dragon, this fellow has started to put in effort like Linger. Qin Mu was glad. The dragon Qilin licked his claws and flipped open dragon-rearing scriptures to read through it carefully. He thought to himself, Dragon-rearing sovereign wrote dragon-rearing scriptures, so I also want to write my own human-rearing scriptures. Not long later, Qin Mu lay down on the dragon Qilin and fell asleep. The dragon Qilin also put his head down to rest. Even though the desert was filled with flames at night, the temperature was very low. The surface of the lake had frozen up, but the dragon Qilin's body was very warm. Flames would puff out from his nostrils from time to time. Near midnight, among the flames outside the oasis, Pan Gong So dug out from underground. He looked at the sleeping Qin Mu and hesitated for a moment. He wondered if he should close in to kill that fellow now. Qin Mu breathed calmly, having no idea what was happening around him. Pan Gong So hesitated one last time before deciding to land a fatal blow when he saw Dragon Chi flying out from Dao Tai Sak as Qin Mu breathed. They were like fine slithering dragons around him. Pan Gong So saw Qin Mu's hand in the Dao Tai Sak, and his heart trembled. He suddenly changed his mind and turned around to sink back into the ground. He noticed. Qin Mu opened one eye and looked around before shutting it again. He took out the hand he had placed in his Dao Tai Sak and continued to guide the dragon in the True Dragon's Nest while he snored. This time he had really fallen asleep. Traces of True Dragon Chi were absorbed by his body, improving his vital chi and raising his cultivation. Qin Mu had relied on the True Dragon's Nest and Emperor's Disc to cultivate the last few months, because of which his cultivation had been able to raise that fast. Even Pan Gong So, who had reincarnated over 10 times, couldn't get ahead of him. Of course, the most crucial point was still his frequent dual cultivation of primordial spirit with Ling Yuxiao and Sai Yunxiao. It benefited him a lot, and his cultivation didn't fall behind that of Pan Gong So, who had entered 7 Stars realm. When day broke, Xiong Qia woke up and whined that she was starving. Qin Mu used some minced lean meat and vegetables to cook her porridge. He also made some pastries before refining a few improved spirit pills for the dragon Qilin. My human rearing scriptures will definitely succeed. The dragon Qilin was full of confidence. Cult Master thought he succeeded in cultivating dragon rearing scriptures, but he has no idea that he's in the grasp of my human rearing scriptures. When the caravan was ready to set off, the old merchant bade farewell to Qin Mu and warned him again, "Brother Qin must never say that you are from Great Ruins, otherwise, there will be great trouble. Qin Mu thanked him and got on the dragon Chilean's forehead to rush towards the west. Behind him came the bells ringing on the gazelles' necks as they carried the goods toward great ruins in the east. The dragon Chilean's speed was fast, but they still couldn't reach West Earth even running all the way to the evening. When they passed by a huge mountain, Qin Mu took a few glances at it, but the dragon Chilean ran past it the next moment. Qin Mu then said, "Fatty dragon, go back." The dragon Chilean was puzzled, but immediately did as asked. Qin Mu examined the mountain and saw that it was extremely majestic. There were no flames on it, so Qin Mu quickly went to its peak. It was vast and covered in broken fences and dilapidated walls. Qin Mu could imagine the majestic sight back when everything was still standing. There were some dried-up corpses buried in the sand, and Qin Mu examined them. They showed up to be giants that had abnormally tall and sturdy bodies. He came to a pillar and touched it. Beside it lay some thick chains. "Cult Master, what's with this mountain?" The dragon Chilean flew over on fire clouds. Qin Mu raised his finger to point at the desert far away. "Look over there." The dragon Chilean looked in the pointed direction and saw a pitch-black ball which let the wind and sand caress it. "It's sun ship, a dead sun ship." Qin Mu disembarked from the ship, expressionless. "Let's go." The dragon Chilean looked at his face and didn't dare to say anything more. Instead, he continued to carry him to the west. Soon after, they encountered a second huge ship. It was a shattered moon ship. After that, they encountered a third huge ship buried in the desert. That moon ship had suffered in an extremely fierce battle and was exceptionally ruined. Qin Mu suddenly came to realization. 10,000 spirit nature technique is the bane of sun ship and moon ship. This video will end here.